Story 1. It was the first time this woman had me come and meet her family. They ordered pizza, and when it arrived, I said, "Oh, I got it." But I dropped the pizza as soon as I closed the door. Everyone was quiet for what seemed like an hour, and then, at the same time, her dad and both of her brothers started laughing and crying. I thought her dad was going to have a heart attack. To this day, he says he has never laughed harder, and he's almost 90 years old. Over 30 years later, her family still makes fun of me. Story 2. My wife is a snoozer. She hits the snooze button a dozen times before moving. Each time the alarm goes off, she smacks it without turning it off. She hits it again, but it still doesn't shut off. Eventually, she starts hitting the alarm repeatedly, yet it continues to ring. She sits up and realizes two things. It's the trash truck alarm, and she has been slapping my head the whole time. Did it wake me? Story 3. I let out a noxious silent fart in the grocery store while we were checking out. His face went pale as he hurriedly grabbed the grocery bags. He said, "We need to get out of here. Someone farted, and it smells really bad." He walked away quickly, and I couldn't stop laughing, struggling to keep pace. He didn't turn around until we reached the parking lot. When he saw me laughing, he exclaimed, "That was you. We have been together for 17 years and married for almost 10 years. Story 4. We weren't even dating yet. We had hung out a few times in a group, and he was driving me back to my sister's place in his new car when I threw up everywhere. I tried to open the window to throw up outside, but that didn't work. I ended up throwing up on the window, the door, myself, and his soft gray leather seats. When I tell you that my beloved husband of 20 years is a neat freak and a perfectionist, that's an understatement. Knowing him now, I can't believe he ever spoke to me again. I can't believe he cleaned all of that up and still proposed 6 months later. Story 5. I had a few beers, not realizing they were 10% alcohol by volume each. This was completely my own poor judgment and lack of attention. I threw up twice in the toilet and once in the bathtub in his apartment, managing to get sick in my own hair each time. He cleaned it up 3 times, washed my hair, and combed it out. The third time, he found my anti-frizz spray and French braided it. We got married 4 months ago and have been together 5.5 years. He's the best. Story 6. I was in my first year of work after law school. I was working around the clock, extremely sleep-deprived, and had virtually no social life. A friend took me to a party with several of his Burning Man artist friends. They took turns discussing their current projects, sculptures, textile art, and all kinds of fascinating creations. I felt out of place and somewhat inadequate, and my sleep-deprived state affected my social skills. When it was my turn to share, I blurted out, "All I make is money." I intended to be self-deprecating and humorous, but the joke fell flat. You could have heard a pin drop. I still cringe 15 years later. Story 7. Heavy period overnight. I woke up to a near crime scene. Worse yet, it was a hotel room. He was totally calm and didn't even blink twice. He never brought it up again either. Story 8. When he introduced me to his parents, I was already nervous. When we got into his parents' car to go to dinner, I was hit with a very unpleasant smell. I thought maybe one of his parents had an accident or something, like perhaps they were wearing adult diapers or just hadn't showered in a week. No one said anything in the car, total awkward silence. When we finally reached our destination, I stepped out of the car and my foot slipped. I had unknowingly stepped in fresh dog waste right before getting in the car and had managed to grind it into the carpet during the ride. My partner cleaned that up for me, and it took some years, some alcohol, and singing karaoke before I felt like his mom finally accepted me. Story 9. Not me, but my loving husband. In the early days of dating, we were waiting out a rainstorm while walking in a Mexican grocery store. As we explored the imported items, he picked up a bottle of men's cologne. I leaned in to give it a smell as he squeezed the sides of the plastic bottle to waft the scent toward me. However, he squeezed too hard, and it shot straight up my nose and down my throat. It was startling and awful, and all I could smell for hours was cheap aftershave. I still married the doofus. Story 10. I farted on the first date. The next morning, a few weeks later, I laughed so hard that I got a fettuccine noodle stuck in my nose and had to excuse myself because I couldn't breathe. A few weeks after that, I smacked my boyfriend's cousin's boyfriend really hard. I was drunk and they looked similar from behind. 18 years later, I'm still an embarrassment. Story 11. We went to an amusement park, and one of the rides suddenly made me very nauseous. I tried to hold it in, but it didn't work and I ended up vomiting. Unfortunately, it was one of those giant spinning swings, and my husband was directly behind me and got covered. He cleaned himself up and took me home while having to pull over several times to let me out to be sick. We've been married for 13 years, and I don't go on amusement park rides anymore. Story 12. We were already married for about a month. We had rented a house with a one-lane driveway and often switched our vehicles to avoid blocking each other. One afternoon, I moved my car forward and tried to park his truck behind it. The truck was a manual transmission, and I was not an expert. Long story short, I hit the back of my car with the truck. I quickly looked out the window, and sure enough, he was watching and had seen what happened. I stayed in the truck for a while but finally decided to face the music. All he said was that we should try not to hit our vehicles against each other and then dropped the subject. We will celebrate 43 years this year. Story 13. I did not know at the time that I was allergic to Vagisil. The gynecologist was even surprised at how swollen I was. I had to sit with my legs open in front of a fan for a week. My partner took care of everything for me that week. Story 14. Early on, I spent the night and overslept the next morning. He had already left for work, and I was slightly hungover, so I went to the bathroom. I ended up clogging the toilet. There was no plunger, and I was late for work, so I rushed out and eventually worked up the courage to text him about it. He bought a plunger on his way home and took care of it. We have been together for 11 years now. Story 15. We had been dating long enough that marriage had been discussed, but we were not engaged yet. I have a thing about symmetry that he was at least somewhat aware of at the time, but maybe he didn't know the extent of my quirkiness. One night we were talking about rings, and I mentioned my preference for symmetry and how I disliked the wrap-type wedding rings that go around a solitaire engagement ring because the ones I had seen on friends who were engaged didn't look visually balanced to me. He started laughing but wouldn't elaborate on why that was funny. A month later, he proposed. I said yes. Then he pulled the wrap-style wedding ring out of his pocket and said, "This is why I was laughing when you said you hated wrap rings. I had already bought it, but we can go pick out a different one." I felt horrible, and in that moment I also knew I would have loved that wrap ring knowing he picked it out for me. But he took me to the store, and we got a different wedding band that I've worn for nearly 25 years now. He will never let me forget that I hate wrap rings. Though, I wish I had learned to listen more and talk less earlier in life. Story 16. We had just finished and I rolled away from him to get out of bed and clean up. However, I miscalculated how close I was to the edge of the bed and fell to the floor, which hurt a lot. As I stood up, I stepped in the mess and slipped. That's when we started laughing. Story 17. Early on while dating, I was late to dinner at her house. She said I was late to everything, and I stupidly replied, "I'm never late for important things." We have been married for almost 15 years, and she still makes fun of me for that remark. Story 18. I was born a clueless geek and probably will always be one. On our third date, back in 1965, we went to the drive-in. When you bought a pizza in those days, it came in a simple cardboard box. I held it sideways, and it slid down the leg of my pink stretch pants, covering my sandals and the floor. He married me anyway. Don't say he wasn't warned. Story 19. One of the first few times having sex, my husband picked a large piece of toilet paper out and simply remarked that our toilet paper was inadequate. He continued without any further concern. Story 20. Well, I almost ruined his proposal. He has an acquaintance who I believe is the most unpleasant person, and he was dating a colleague of mine, whom I also have no respect for. They got engaged in Hawaii the day before we arrived. I was expecting a marriage proposal at any time. When I saw their social media posts, I said, "Don't do something cheesy like propose in Hawaii." Fortunately, he knew I am my own worst enemy and carried out his original plan, which turned out to be a perfect day. I'll never live this one down. Story 21. We spent our first Christmas together with his family. I had horrible cramps and excused myself to the bathroom. Unfortunately, I clogged the toilet and panicked. After I sent a message for help, my now husband came to my rescue with a plunger. His brother saw him and laughed, asking, "Clogged the toilet?" My husband simply replied, "Yep," and took the blame to save me the embarrassment. That's when I knew it was true love. Story 22. I tripped and fell into his mouth during our first kiss. He thought I was being overly enthusiastic when I came flying in. My heel caught on some uneven asphalt, and with my lips puckered and my head turned up, I crash-landed against his chest. He pulled back, prying me off of him, and said with a knowing smirk, "Let's try that again." Then he leaned in for the most breathtaking kiss I've ever experienced. I was so embarrassed because I'm not usually clumsy that I completely blocked this from my memory. Maybe a year later, he brought it up laughing. "Remember our first kiss?" I said that I did and talked about a totally different later kiss. He quickly refreshed my memory, and it came flooding back, causing me to groan in distress. To this day, he finds it funny that I blocked our first kiss, and he only half believes me that I tripped. I did, I swear. Story 23. This is not what I did, but what my boyfriend, who later became my husband, did. One evening around 8 or 9, he mentioned that we were supposed to have gone to his parents' house for dinner. 2 of his aunts and an uncle were visiting from out of state. I had never met his parents before, and the first time I did, we were 3 hours late. His wonderful mother fixed us plates for dinner, and the 2 aunts and the uncle became my favorites after that. My husband and I were married for 46.5 years until he passed away 2 years ago. Story 24. We were engaged and living together. I am a restless sleeper. One night, I rolled over and did not realize how close she was to me. I accidentally kneed her hard in the small of her back, just to the right of her spine. She was in agony and had problems with that spot in her back for years afterwards. However, we have been together for 20 years and have 3 kids. We had an awesome day together today, so I believe she has forgiven me. Story 25. One time, I sat down very close to him on the couch. So close, in fact, that one of his long toenails dug into my leg. I was bleeding. I still have a scar. I swear his superpower is the fastest growing toenails on the planet. Story 26. We were in college and he lived close by, so we spent a lot of time at his house. The doors were not completely sealed, meaning there was space at the top. I needed to use the restroom but pretended I was just going for a quick bathroom break. I always check the toilet paper to ensure it's clean. He decided to jokingly surprise me and jumped above the opening at the most inconvenient moment when I was inspecting the toilet paper. I knew he saw and he knew I knew he saw. We both never acknowledged that it happened. Story 27. I farted first, and it was unpleasant. We did the whole "we've been dating a while, let's just do it and be done." I felt tricked. It was like that scene in Step Brothers, where Seth Rogen can taste the ketchup and onions. Story 28. My husband and I hadn't been dating long when we were at his apartment having a movie night with pizza. We ordered from Pizza Hut. Later, I started to have terrible gas while he was spooning me on the couch as we watched the movie. He said something funny that made me laugh, and before I knew it, I let out a series of farts. I was mortified and laughed hysterically out of embarrassment as I ran to his bathroom. My husband was amused, maybe a bit grossed out, but he was waiting for me when I finally emerged. We're celebrating our 10-year anniversary in October. Story 29. I had an apartment and was falling behind on my electric bill. I tried to work as much as I could to catch up, but I was close to having my service shut off. On the day they were going to cut my electricity, she helped pay the bill. I felt so embarrassed that I wouldn't have blamed her if she had chosen not to stay with me. From that day on, she takes care of all the bills. Story 30. Drugs. She has never drank or used drugs. She walked in on my friends and me several times while we were using drugs. Thankfully, I have been clean for 35 years. Our firstborn is 35. I woke up. Story 31. My husband completely embarrassed himself while asking me out. We were chatting while I was driving, and I was lamenting the ways of immature men and how I was growing tired of them. We were on the way to his mother's house. As we pulled onto her street, he suddenly squeaked out, "Will you go out with me?" in a prepubescent voice that cracked. I couldn't help but laugh and asked him if he wanted to try again. After 2 more attempts, he finally went into a more determined mode and just kind of growled the question out. I said yes to dating him right there in his mother's driveway, and then immediately greeted her with, "Hey Mom." We celebrated 1 year of marriage this past Memorial Day. The most embarrassing thing I did was sleep talk. I have had this habit all my life, and we were maybe a week into dating. He couldn't sleep because my place was new to him, and he was very nervous being so close to me. I apparently sleep talked and told him I loved him that night. When he finally told me about it months later, after we both said, "I love you," while awake and coherent, I couldn't stop blushing. Story 32. We weren't even dating yet, but I was helping her move. We were friends before we started dating. I was moving the kitchen items when I dropped a box and broke her nice ceramic plates. I felt terrible, so I gave her $200 to replace them, but some of the plates were sentimental and irreplaceable. I felt really bad. About a year later, we started dating, and she chose a Greek restaurant. Apparently, at Greek restaurants, they celebrate by smashing plates on the floor, which I thought was a cute choice. She insisted on smashing my plate for me, which I thought was fair. Story 33. I am not married yet, but I used to be a bit of a hoarder. My boyfriend is very clean and organized. I had started cleaning and becoming more organized myself, but I had a large house and much of it was still a mess. He was willing to give me a chance in hopes that I was genuinely changing, and eventually saw that I was. I am so glad he was willing to do that. Honestly, I wouldn't have blamed him for leaving because of that mess. Story 34. While we were still dating, we went on a mini vacation with her parents. I contracted a severe stomach virus that caused violent diarrhea and projectile vomiting for 3 days in the rented condo. At some point during that ordeal, I soiled more than 1 pair of boxers. Story 35. Not me, but my husband had to have neck surgery when we had been dating for about a year and a half. I took time off to care for him. The day after he came home, I set up a rollaway bed in the living room and was getting him settled since he had been walking. As I went to cover him up, he vomited all over me, from my chest down to my bare feet. As he tried to grab the trash can, he knocked his bottle of pain medication into it and vomited on them. Without thinking, I grabbed the bottle of pills and wiped it off. My biggest concern was that he wouldn't have his medication because no doctor would believe that a full bottle of pain medication could be vomited on. Thankfully, the bottle was sealed. It was like a scene from a horror movie for about 15 minutes. We've been together for 12 years now. Story 36. We had dinner one night and were hanging out at his apartment when it was time for me to head home. We had never spent an overnight together at that point, and he begged me to stay just for a little while and cuddle. I fell asleep while he was spooning me, and apparently, I farted on him in my sleep. He never told me about it until after we were married, and I still wanted to crawl out of my own skin when I heard about it. Story 37. Well, it turns out I am a sleep farter. I have multiple blasts throughout the night that are of significant volume and smell. My wife and I spent every night together after each of our dates for the first 6 months. The entire time, she never let on that I was fumigating the room. She didn't mention it until we reached a level of comfort with each other. And yes, I am still a sleep farter. Story 38. I'll answer for my husband. One time, after intimacy, we were in bed naked. I was lying on my side watching television, and he was on his side facing the other way using his phone. We were back to back. Then he farted directly into my backside. I jumped off the bed in shock and hit the wall and then the floor, both laughing and crying. I still haven't recovered, and it was years ago. Story 39. I slid through a stop sign on an icy road on our first date and got T-boned. She suffered a broken pelvis and was in a hospital bed at home for 2 months. We have been married for 28 years now and have 2 kids. Story 40. We had been dating for just a few weeks. We were driving to dinner when I had to quickly pull off to a side street and park. I had just run out of gas. She thought I was joking, but I wasn't. We have been married for 35 years now, and she laughs about it today. Story 41. I have bipolar disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder. We were at the Veterans Affairs Hospital, and I was waiting to see my medical doctor. A man was making inappropriate gestures at me, which triggered an episode. The next thing I knew, I was being carried down the hall by 4 VA policemen, and I was screaming. My boyfriend was trying to tell them not to hurt me. Then I was placed in an ambulance and taken to the VA mental health facility for the night. He wasn't informed of my location because we were not married. I was released the next day and brought back to the original hospital, where he picked me up. I thought this would be the end of our relationship, but he proposed 1 year later, and we have been married for 14 years. So, he overlooked my bipolar disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder episode. Story 42. We were dating, living together, and engaged at the time of this story. Combining our households resulted in an abundance of household goods. Specifically, we somehow owned 5 can openers, but only one worked well. I could never recall which one it was, so I would grab one, try it, then grab the next until I found the good one and open the various cans needed for dinner. I left the other can openers out with the intent of discussing what to do with them. However, before we could have that conversation, he would do the dishes, including rinsing and putting back the can openers. This happened casually for years. Finally, after he had proposed to me, he asked, "Why do you use 1 can opener per can?" He was a bit relieved when I explained what was going on, and I was impressed he had been willing to marry me while thinking I was that much of a crazy person. Story 43. We aren't married, but we have been dating for a long time. The first time I met her parents, I was staying with her in town for a bit while my building was being fumigated, so I had my bag and my pipe. Anyway, at around 10:30 or 11 o'clock, her dad saw the cannabis, and he mentioned he always wanted to try it, so we smoked it together. He became very high and approached his wife to explain in detail how he cheated on her with her sister. She laughed, looked at me, and said, "I absorbed my sister in the womb." He says he had relations with her because we're the same person. Before she said this, however, I was mortified. Story 44. Our very first date was quite memorable. My husband had never been to the Mexican restaurant I chose. I advised him against ordering the shrimp burrito al diablo, but he didn't listen. I tried to explain that it was spicy, even for those who enjoy spicy food. He confidently remarked, "I can handle it." Soon enough, his eyes were watering, and I couldn't help but laugh at him. He joined in, saying, "You were right." Then he added, "Well, you know what they say, what goes down hot, comes out hot." I was shocked that he would say something like that on a first date, and then I burst into laughter. I was crying and snorting, imagining him in the bathroom with many regrets. We still laugh about it now. Story 45. We had been dating for only a couple of weeks and had not slept together at this point. I had just moved back home after getting out of the military and was staying with my parents downstairs. We were preparing to watch a movie we had rented and hang out for a bit. My much younger brother was still living at home. I had just returned from upstairs to get drinks and popcorn, my hands full. Just as I was about 5 or 6 feet in front of my girlfriend, who is now my wife of 27 years and sitting on the couch, my brother decided to pull my pants down. He not only grabbed my shorts but also my underwear. Intentional or not, everything came down. I could only stand there, hands full of popcorn and drinks. I calmly set down what was in my hands and pulled up my shorts. As I turned around, the look of fear and surprise on my brother's face was almost comical. He ran faster than he had ever moved before, possibly scared for his life. My girlfriend just blushed and thought it was funny. When I finally sat down, she said, "Well, you've shown me yours. I guess I'm going to have to show you mine now." I knew she was a keeper then. Story 46. He accidentally vomited spaghetti in the bathroom sink after one too many dabs on our second night together. I immediately started cleaning it up, and then he held me on the couch until my roommate could come get me. I was convinced he would never want to see me again, but we've been married almost 5 years, and he has never even teased me about it. Story 47. First dinner with my parents. We sat down to eat. I grabbed the bottle of salad dressing and shook it, not knowing the cap wasn't really on. Dressing went everywhere, even on the ceiling. I was covered. I had spent hours getting ready for the evening. My mother laughed and laughed while I started to cry. My father and now husband just sat there, stone-faced. Story 48. We went to my parents' house for an omelet brunch. By the time we got back, I had the pots. They were very eggy. He made me leave the room the next time I needed to pass gas, so I did. I came back in and sat down right next to him, and the smell wafted out from the back of my jeans. From then on, I had to shake it out before I came back into the room. We have been together for 20 years now. Story 49. I asked her to move in with me while I was under the influence of Ambien. The next night when she brought it up, I had no idea what she was talking about. She was devastated, and I was mortified. We moved in together and we are now married. Story 50. It took a couple of months to realize I had lactose intolerance. I consumed a lot of cheese and milk, so it took some time to make the connection. Right when we started dating, I asked if we could stop at that gas station so I could make balloon animal noises behind a rickety door. Again, Story 51. I was 45 minutes late to both our first and second dates, and I choked on a chicken bone on the second one as well. Story 52. I had a seizure in my sleep and wet the bed. To be fair, it wasn't my fault, and being the amazing person he is, he took me straight to the hospital. We've been together for 19 years now. Story 53. Oh, I love when a post comes up that I can tell this story on. My husband is the one who did the embarrassing thing. I did the overlooking. Once, when we were maybe 6 months into dating, we were having an intimate moment in the missionary position, with my husband on top of me looking down. We were going at it pretty intensely, and he was breathing heavily. He breathed so hard that a big, slimy booger came out of his nose and fell straight into my open eye. He was incredibly embarrassed and felt terrible. Obviously, we had to stop so I could go to the bathroom and remove the mucus from my eye. But if my memory serves me right, I'm pretty sure we went right back to it afterward. Good times. We've been married for 5 years now, and he's the best. Story 54. The first night I stayed over at his place, I woke him up by moaning, "Help," in my sleep. A great time for a nightmare. Story 55. Mine is small but funny. In college, I worked 3 jobs and was often pretty tired, getting home late. One night, after a late shift, I was starving and stopped at a fast food restaurant before heading home. I texted my girlfriend, now my wife, that I was on my way to her place. She replied that she'd made dinner for me. Not wanting to tell her, I quickly ate 2 cheeseburgers in the parking lot and disposed of the evidence. When I got to her place, I was too full to eat her dinner and blamed it on exhaustion, which she accepted. However, the next day, she found the receipt from the fast food restaurant in my car from 20 minutes before I arrived. To this day, I do not know why I lied to her about it. The look on her face when she read the receipt timestamp back to me was priceless. Story 56. I embarrassed myself in the Walmart beer aisle while shopping for the weekend. I thought it was a harmless gas, but it turned out to be more than that. The beer aisle was at the back of the store, so I told my girlfriend I needed to run to the restroom. It was a long walk to the bathroom. Once I got inside, I disposed of my underwear and cleaned up. After washing my hands, I noticed someone next to me doing the same. Suddenly, I felt something rattle and fall out of my shorts. It was a leftover piece that I had missed, and it landed right on the gentleman's foot. Horrified, I quickly left the bathroom and told my girlfriend that we had to leave immediately, promising I would explain later. We had only been dating for 4 weeks, and we are now married for 9 years. Story 57. I accidentally elbowed her face while switching positions during playtime. To her credit, she took it with grace and didn't stop. She had 2 black eyes the next day. I felt terrible. Story 58. My wife and I had been dating for about 2 months when we had to share a bathroom with 1 toilet. We both had diarrhea and had to swap positions every few minutes. We have been married for 6 years now. Story 59. It was my first time trying anal and he was really eager to try it, so I agreed. Afterwards, he asked me to join him in the shower, but I said I was tired. He kept insisting, so I finally went in, and I was embarrassed to find that there was feces on him. I felt humiliated. Story 60. There was a lot of commotion in this discussion. I went on a day date with a young woman and drove her 65 miles from our town to a place called Charlestown Landing. It was the site of the founding of Charleston, South Carolina. It featured an animal forest, settlement buildings, a ship replica, and a museum. We entered a wooden house with an upstairs loft, reminiscent of Little House on the Prairie. I let her go ahead into the house and up the ladder to the loft. She didn't duck her head in time and bumped her head on the wooden frame of the opening. The loud noise made me laugh before I could stop myself, which caused her to feel very embarrassed. Fortunately, we moved past that awkward moment and went on more dates. We have now been married for 30 years. Story 61. We managed to do it together. Yay for being young adults. After we got married, something we both agreed to wait on, we decided having children at 20 and 21 was not a good idea. So, being experimental, we had fun with it. Condoms and cups and rhythm. Oh my. One day we decided to try spermicide. Out came the applicator and we celebrated. About 4 minutes later, we found ourselves in the only bathroom at my mother's house, straddling the shower set to Tiny Mexican, desperately trying to wash the substance, this joy assassin, off of our private areas. It burned for the whole night. 2 6-foot-tall people lying naked in bed, blowing on each other's bodies, not in a fun way. We're thinking, sex was cool. I'm glad we tried it, but man, knitting is awesome, I bet. We are thankful we can laugh about it years later. Story 62. We got pregnant with twins before we got married. I didn't even move in with him until I was 5 months along. I can't remember if I was 3 or 4 months pregnant when he took me to a nice restaurant. I ordered some iced tea and a pasta dish. After taking my first sip of tea, I felt the all-too-familiar nausea that indicated I was about to throw up. I experienced severe nausea during my pregnancy. I made it to the bathroom just in time. This restaurant had one women's bathroom without a stall, just a single room. As I was bending over to vomit, I lost control of my bladder. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, unsure of what to do. I finally cracked open the door and asked the woman waiting for the bathroom to get my boyfriend. The only thing I told him was that I needed a change of pants. That poor man had to drive to my apartment, dig through my dirty clothes since nothing was clean, and rush back so I could change. I couldn't leave the bathroom during this time, so all the women had to use the men's restroom. Meanwhile, I was trying to clean up a puddle on the floor with toilet paper. We returned to my place and sat on the couch. I was completely mortified. Beyond mortified. Shockingly, after a few minutes, he proposed. I could not believe he wanted to marry me after the night we had just experienced. I immediately said yes. We got married 4 days before our boys were born. 16 years later, we're still married. Story 63. He was going down on me and I passed gas. It makes me feel horrible just thinking about it. We now joke about it occasionally, thank God. Story 64. My family, clean enthusiasts, normalized using the kitchen sink when the bathroom wasn't available. How was I to know that a hoarding family wouldn't do the same thing? Story 65. 6 months in, I got sick all over his bathroom floor, and he cleaned it up and drove me home. I also woke myself up once due to passing gas. We've been together for almost 11 years and just celebrated our 5th wedding anniversary. Story 66. This experience was both gross and funny to me at the same time. I had flown to meet my now husband. We were friends at the time but interested in making our relationship more serious. The day before the flight, I had caught a stomach bug that was going around locally, but I felt well enough to fly on the day I was scheduled to leave after contemplating canceling due to being ill. During the first week in his home, he had both children from a previous marriage. They had been divorced a few years earlier. My now stepson, for some crazy reason, decided to gorge on juice drinks and fruit. I was fast asleep, feeling the jet lag from the UK to the US, when he woke my now husband, saying, "Dad, I've been sick," leaving a trail from the living room doorway all the way to the bathroom through the kitchen. Thankfully, the kitchen was tiled, so my husband got up to start cleaning. My poor husband's reaction upon seeing and cleaning vomit was to start vomiting himself. He was throwing up while desperately trying to clean up the kid's mess, making an even bigger mess. He came and gently woke me, saying, "I need your help. I'm so sorry to wake you. The kid's been sick. I'm vomiting while trying to clean it, and I'm about to throw up again." He then ran off, saying, "Oh God." So, I got up half asleep and started cleaning up after two people who had vomited while on vacation, trying to get to know each other. I have a strong stomach, so I just got into the zone, equipped with bleach, gloves, paper towels, and hot soapy water at 2 a.m., jet lagged to the max. He admitted that was the moment he knew I was the one for him. He fell for me head over heels that night. I didn't complain or act rude. I just rolled up my sleeves and cleaned their mess. Yes, it was gross. I did not feel remotely sexy or think it was romantic at all. But we've been together for 17 years, married for 10, and have lived together for 11.5 years. We are very happily married. Story 67. I brought my girlfriend and her parents to a restaurant to meet them, and it was a good first meeting. On the way back to the car, I tripped on a small bump designed to slow parking lot traffic and loudly cursed in Russian about the foolish person who created speed bumps. Her father is Polish and studied in Moscow in the 1980s before moving to the United States. He fully understood everything and responded in Russian. I felt as if I was about to dive headfirst onto the street in embarrassment. Story 68. Stinky feet. The leather boots I loved were too tight to wear with socks. I tried powders, but nothing worked. He tolerated it, and after we married years later, he endearingly reminded me. Story 69. My wife and I met online and were eager to meet up. We had a very charged date that ended at her place, where we kissed passionately. I kissed her all over her neck because she enjoyed it. I went too hard, leaving her with several hickeys on her neck. She wore turtlenecks and scarves for 2 weeks waiting for them to fade. Yet she still dated me afterward. I thought I had ruined everything after she mentioned the hickeys. We just completed our first year of marriage and have been together for 3 years. Story 70. I had an embarrassing moment. Felt like just a harmless fart, but it was anything but that. In an unfortunate situation, she drank half a bottle of cheap red wine and ended up getting sick all over her bed at her parents' house. I was a little buzzed but helped her clean up and made sure she stayed hydrated. Now, I'm married with 2 kids. It's been about 15 years. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.